I want to share with you a couple of strategies for respiratory illness. These were things that were kind of batted around during COVID. And of all the things going on during COVID, these were a couple that I thought were pretty helpful for people. And I think that they still have some utility moving forward. So I want to share them with you. The first one I'm going to give you is a recipe for nebulizing. Now, if you don't have a nebulizer, this isn't going to help you. You can get a nebulizer on Amazon relatively inexpensively. I think it's like 50 bucks. At this point, I would say every family probably ought to have a nebulizer in the house and know how to use it. You may never need it, but for the expense and the peace of mind, I think it probably makes sense to have one around. I will also say, in my opinion, respiratory illnesses post-COVID are not behaving like they did before COVID. I don't know if we're different or if the illnesses are different, like that remains to be seen. But many times now, patients who usually just breeze through illnesses are feeling like things are a little more stubborn. So probably something maybe to have around the house. Now, a nebulizer is a machine that uses room air, puts it through a little apparatus, and then you have a mask. Now, sometimes you're just biting on a little tube, sometimes it's a mask over your mouth and nose. But what happens is as the air gets pumped through this little apparatus, it atomizes whatever liquid you've put in there. And then that steam looking atomized liquid comes into your respiratory tract, and you're able to breathe it into your lungs. So it's a way to topically apply medicine to your lungs. Now, we're not going to use medicine, but we're going to use stuff that can be calming and soothing to the lungs. Now, a couple of things I'm going to say. This is not my recipe, right? This was a recipe that was widely distributed during COVID. I didn't come up with it. I had many patients use it very successfully. I am not recommending it to you. I'm telling you what the recipe is. You can evaluate it and see if it's something you think you want to try. And I'm always going to recommend that you talk to your doctor about it before you do. You may have a particular circumstance or situation where this is not the best thing for you, right? So don't just run off willy-nilly and do this and say, well, some dude on a video told me this and, whatever. But it's an option for you. Discuss it with your doctor, see if it's something that you want to have around the house. Or you've heard of it, you just don't know where to find the recipe. Well, I'm going to give it to you today. All right, so disclaimer, right? Don't sue me. All right, so respiratory strategies. This one is the nebulizer. There's another one I'm going to discuss with you in just a second. So what to have on hand? You're going to want to have Lugol's iodine solution. You're going to want to have a nebulizer. You're going to want to have food-grade hydrogen peroxide. Not just the chemical stuff that you would put on your cut. This is food grade. And then you're going to have some sterile saline. Now, the initial recipe was for a 250 milliliter IV bag. They were adding these things to the IV bag, and then you would draw out a certain amount from the IV bag, put it in the nebulizer, and you'd be able to nebulize. Most people aren't going to be doing that. So you can buy 100 milliliter bottles of sterile saline on Amazon. And that's much smaller than that 250 milliliter bag. So you can deal with a smaller batch of this. I don't know how long a batch stays good. That would probably be a question for a pharmacist. But if I made a batch of this, I would probably only use it for 3 or 4 days, and then I'd make a whole new batch. So, if you want, have 4 or 5 of these little 100 milliliter bottles of saline on hand. Just don't open them until you need them. Watch the expiration dates. You may have to replace them every so often. The Lugols and the hydrogen peroxide are not going to expire quite like the sterile saline bottles will, right? They can get old. They'll probably have an expiration date of about a year from when you bought them, all right? So that being said, I have a sheet, right, printed up here. I don't know if you can zoom in on that and read it, but basically it gives you the recipe for the 250 mil batch, and then for the 100 milliliter batch. So the recipe for the 100 milliliter batch, and you'll probably need a little syringe, no needle, but a little syringe with small graduations on it so that you can measure this out. But you're going to put 1.2 milliliters of a 3% food grade hydrogen peroxide solution into the 100 milliliter bottle of saline. So just 1.2 milliliters of the hydrogen peroxide into the sterile saline. That should produce a 0.04% solution of hydrogen peroxide in saline. Now you're going to put 3 milliliters of that into the nebulizer. You're going to add 1 drop of Lugol's iodine to that, and then you're going to nebulize it. Now, if that is too strong for you, like if the scent of Lugol's, of the iodine, is too much for you, or if it burns or anything like that, then what you would do is add 1 or 2 drops to the 100 milliliters of saline and take 3 cc's of that and nebulize it. That's going to dilute the iodine considerably more when you do it that way. But you have to use the food grade hydrogen peroxide. You can find this recipe online several different places. Dr. Mercola discussed it. Dr. McCullough discussed it. I want to say the Frontline Doctors had it on their website as well, which I think is flccc.com. So lots of different places had it. But that's the nebulizing recipe, okay? And I would probably have some version of that available at the house, right? If you never use it, fine. It's not really expensive stuff. The other strategy I wanted to share with you, and I use this regularly in my life, is I have an iodine nasal spray, right? A couple squirts on each side. And you can do the same thing with a colloidal silver nasal spray if iodine is irritating to you. But at the end of the day, after I've seen patients, if I have some patients that have been sick and respiratory stuff, coughing, and whatever, then before I go home, I'll do a couple of sprays in each nostril, let it sit for a minute, sniffle a little so it doesn't run out my nose. And what I've done is I've killed that stuff off in the back of my nasal passages where it would normally incubate for a day or two before it migrates down into the rest of my respiratory tract. And that's where that kind of lead time comes from. Sometimes you would be exposed and then you don't get sick until a couple of days later. It's in there living and replicating and getting ready to mount the attack. If you can kill it off in the back of the nasal passages at the end of every day, it never really gets a chance to build up and do that. And that was a technique used successfully in hospitals and doctors' offices across the country during COVID because they were seeing patients sick with COVID and then going home. And so they'd do a couple of sprays, kill it off in the nasal passages, and they were much less likely to develop a meaningful case of COVID at that point because it was never able to really get a foothold and kind of build up and get ready to make that attack on their lungs. So it was a very successful option. I use the one with a little iodine in it. I'm not sensitive to iodine. It doesn't bother me. But for someone who is sensitive to iodine, something like the colloidal silver one, I had a couple of people say they used one that was oil of oregano, but something that has kind of a killing effect. I would call it antimicrobial effect, right, in the upper airways. And it doesn't just have to be for COVID. It could be for anything, any kind of respiratory illness. You can do that in your nasal passages after an exposure. When your kid gets home from daycare, my wife is an elementary school teacher, so when she gets home from school, she can do that. It's just a really good and very effective way to help keep yourself from getting sick, right? Take care of your immune system, make sure your vitamin D level is where it needs to be. All of that good stuff is still important, but this is one last way to kind of clear all this out each day when you get home. Now, if you are a neti pot user, right, or a sinus rinse user, I would probably encourage you when you get home at the end of the day, do a couple of sprays of this in each nostril, let it sit for a while, give it 30 minutes. Then if you want to go do your nasal rinse, fine. But if you haven't done this yet, just putting saline in there isn't going to kill much. And it's just going to flush that stuff back into your sinuses, and it's going to have a really nice place to sit and fester. So I'm not against nasal rinses, but if you know you've been exposed to sick people during the day, maybe give yourself a quick spritz, let everything die off, and then do your nasal rinse. I think you'll be less likely to cause trouble. All right, so that's the respiratory strategy discussion for today. Again, check with your doctor, make sure it's something that you're okay doing. And that's, like I said, it's not my recipe. It was widely distributed during COVID. I had lots of patients that did it. because they saw it other places and had really good results with it. I used it myself, but it may not be for everybody, right? So don't take this as necessarily me telling you, hey, this is something you have to do. Just, it's an option. Investigate it, discuss it with your doctor, see if it's something that's going to be of benefit for you. All right. But it's something that we keep around at our house so that if some illness, ramps up and becomes a problem, we've got one more way to try to deal with it without getting super sick. All right. Have a great one.